Welcome everyone to the New Look Spoiler Warning podcast. We're going to be talking about the Seth Rollins breakup of the Vision, as well as news about his injury at Crown Jewel. We're going to be talking about plenty more, including a full rundown of everything Crown Jewel had to offer, plenty about John Cena versus AJ Styles, a little bit about what Crown Jewel was setting up in future, and a little bit about John Cena and his run to the top. We need to look about his last year and also probably discuss what they're planning for AJ Styles in his last year as well. We're going to be premiering this. If you're in the premiere, you will see me in that chat. By all means, say hi. If you're not in the premiere, you'll be in my heart, so don't you worry about it. We're going to start by talking about Crown Jewel. Now, this was a show that I know Raw's live, possibly right now, depending on where you are. We will be discussing that, don't you worry. But Crown Jewel was a much better show than WrestlePalooza, and a much better show than it really had need to be. I would say that all matches really delivered. We're going to go through match by match and share some news and share some conversation about it. I want to start with Roman Reigns versus Bronson Reed. Roman Reigns wasn't at Raw, despite still being in Australia, which is an interesting position to be in. A lot of fan reaction really negative on some of this, but I have the esteemed position of not being on X often enough to really know much about this. I know via Reddit that there are some very negative reactions to Bronson Reed having won this match, which confuses me. I don't understand how you're building new stars if you're not giving them wins over the established ones. I would say as well, if you're not a regular during my live shows, this might be news to you, Roman Reigns doesn't have long left in the WWE. He really doesn't. So ideally at this point, building a few new stars is going to do him the world of good and going to do the WWE the world of good. I'd spoken on Spoiler Warning about a Jey Uso heel turn. That's not quite what we got, though there were a lot of changes, it seems, as regards the face and heel dynamic on Raw rather than on the actual Crown Jewel show. But there was a clear tease of that. Roman Reigns is out essentially selling, which is why he wasn't that involved since. But Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso have both taken a bit of a beating on Monday Night Raw, despite the fact that Jey, still ostensibly a good guy, he's certainly making some enemies. The match itself was okay. Speed-wise, tempo-wise, I enjoyed it. I do think they pushed quite quickly to have Bron Breakker arrive and break things up. But if you're having an Australian street fight, or in fact any sort of street fight, I don't fully understand why you wouldn't immediately interfere. I think back to the WrestleMania Triple Threat. I think it was 36 when it was Edge. It wasn't 36. I think it was... No, it would have been. It would have been the one after... Yeah. Anyway, it was around there. When the main event was Roman Reigns versus Daniel Bryan versus Edge. And Jey Uso immediately interfered and spent the entire match wrestling Edge on the outside. It made it, when Roman Reigns was stacking Daniel Bryan and Edge on top of each other to get the pin, it made it a bit more believable, given that Jey Uso and in fact Paul Heyman were both getting involved the entire time. Bron Breakker could have done that, so why didn't he? Well, I'd imagine logically the Usos could then have got involved, but Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker seem very confident in themselves at the moment. You'll have likely seen by now, on Monday Night Raw, Bronson Reed and Bron Breakker broke off on their own, and we'll see what choices Paul Heyman makes. There were teasers of that during Crown Jewel, particularly in the build to the Cody versus Seth match later on in the night. We will be discussing that one. But when it comes to Roman, the street fight element for me was basically just an excuse for interference. We did see a couple of weapons, but we didn't see anything particularly intense. Roman Reigns isn't really a hardcore wrestler anymore. He has things he needs to protect, and rightfully so. Though Bronson Reed is a powerhouse, so I would argue that street fights don't really suit them anyway. As I say though, the match itself was good. Bronson Reed has been very well built over the last couple of years by Seth Rollins, by Roman Reigns. The Shield really believe in this guy, as does Kazuchika Okada. Before Bronson Reed's return, he was Jonah wrestling in New Japan and doing extremely well at that as well. So I think Bronson Reed has a very bright future, and this was a really good first step to get that momentum going by beating Roman Reigns. I also am very happy that we didn't get 2 Roman Reigns wins in a row. It does mean, though, that Roman Reigns is going to get a big return again for War Games, and we'll see who he's standing opposite, because it doesn't look like it'll be Seth. The next match was Stephanie Vaca versus Tiffany Stratton. I expected Reed to win. I also expected Stephanie Vaquer to win. The women's division came out of this particular show very, very strong. We had a women's tag team match and we had a women's champion versus champion. It is rare in a 5-match card that we get 2 women's matches. Very rare indeed, and not something you see very often. So Stephanie Vaquer versus Tiffany Stratton is getting called out by fans for not being long enough. I very much agree with that. I think they could have gone a lot longer. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Tiffany Stratton's matches, particularly the ones involving Jade Cargill, have felt a little stinted, have felt a little brief. And it's harmed my enjoyment of them, because I know she's very talented. She should be able to absolutely go for hours if need be. As a wrestler, you need to be able to last. You need to have that stamina. I'm sure she does. But for some reason, she's in against opponents who either don't or won't. Now, for Stephanie Vaquer, there is still a bit of a language barrier, though that is improving rapidly, and WWE are very happy with her. But this was a big deal for Stephanie Vaquer. She's not just the women's champion, she defeated the undefeated. Tiffany Stratton had not been beaten in 2025. 10 solid months, and it's not like she didn't defend the championship. Tiffany Stratton feels like a really big name, and when you factor in how long she's been in the company, she should not feel like that. But we are where we are. She's beaten a lot of big names. She worked with Becky, she beat Charlotte, she's been beating Nia Jax. The clean win against Jade Cargill is way more than I was expecting. So it's a scalp for Stephanie Vaquer to pick up the win, kind of as clean as you want. Good match to go on second. I do feel like they spread it out very nicely with the matches that they laid out. The third one, of course, being Cena versus Styles. We knew that was going to be good. And the right main event in Cody versus Rollins. 2 women's matches split up alongside the card. So I enjoyed this. I think Stephanie Vaquer can go further. And I think WWE know that. It feels a lot like when Rhea Ripley debuted. Because when Rhea debuted, I remember writing an article for Bell to Bells, if you've ever read on that particular site when they were just starting. And I remember saying that for Rhea Ripley to succeed, all the WWE actually need to do is get out the way. Now, she read that and she responded to it, and I appreciate that from her. So that was during my earlier days as a wrestling journalist. Stephanie Vaquer has that same vibe to me, that same feeling, that she can do anything. The WWE just need to let her. And why wouldn't they? It would be silly not to. The third match we had was John Cena versus AJ Styles, and I know a lot of you loved this. There was a lot to love. This was very much the John Cena style. I know there are some people questioning the style of it in that it was, finisher spam. It was hit a big move and lay down for a bit. Yes, but John Cena's been doing that since the John Cena versus Kevin Owens days back in 2014. That's who he is now. In fact, as he gets older, as does AJ Styles, that's becoming more the accepted style. You look at the matches that AJ had with Brock Lesnar, consider Brock Lesnar's best matches. You look at the match that the year after Daniel Bryan had with Brock Lesnar, considered another one of Brock Lesnar's best matches. I've got to say, this style gets plaudits. It's interesting seeing 2 people at the end of their career essentially wrestle an NXT match as well. This is Triple H's style. This is what he produces. Now, apparently there was a production team, but John Cena and AJ Styles essentially booked this one themselves, which I give them credit for. AJ Styles had no interest in winning. He's rebuilding Cena, ready for the big final moments, and as far as Styles is concerned, he's going to get the big moments soon. He's going to get a very strong retirement tour in 2026, maybe not John Cena strong, but still a very strong and brief tour himself. So AJ Styles knows that he's going to be very well respected by the company in his retirement. For John Cena, Styles was more than happy to take the loss. There's a couple of moments in the match I do want to highlight. One that would be considered largely negative and one that would be considered more positive. The more positive one came later, so that you might kind of forget the more negative one. John Cena was trying, and between him and Styles, to give a little bit of credit to someone he worked with and someone he really enjoyed working with early in his career, Chris Benoit. Name redacted, as is typically known on this channel. That is interesting. He'll be able to play it off as maybe he was channeling Sasha Banks. He wasn't. That's not how she does it, and it's not been how she does it for a long time. And yeah, it's an interesting one because they did a whole storyline when Cena first started and was the United States champion, where he wouldn't show respect to anyone until a Survivor Series match, and the first person he ever decided to shake hands with was Chris Benoit. He was a big part of John Cena's career. He really was. He's also someone that John Cena still holds in very high regard. Much like Vince McMahon. John Cena has his opinions. There was also a more positive one a little later that I know you'll all remember. The Sister Abigail. John Cena delivering the Sister Abigail to AJ Styles was a huge moment, and I've got to immediately give huge respect to the crowd for channeling in that moment the Fireflies, for showing their respect, for jumping on that and making sure that everyone, including John Cena, who got very emotional after the match, including John Cena, knew how much the fans respected him for that moment. And they really did. They really did. I did as well. Like, I've just called Cena out for some of the people that he chooses to spend time with or that he still has very high opinions of. I'm not going to call him out for anything regarding Bray Wyatt because I hold him in very high regard myself. I do apologise if you can hear music from my neighbour. I hope I don't get demonetised. We had then the women's tag team match. This was Rhea Ripley, hometown hero, much like Bronson Reed, and Io Sky versus the Kabuki Warriors, that being Asuka and, wearing the Kitsune mask, which is a fox god, that's what that means by the by, Kairi Sane. I expected the faces to win, primarily because Rhea Ripley. Also, I feel confident that come WrestleMania, what we're leading towards is Rhea Ripley versus Io Sky, rather than Io Sky versus Asuka. I think Asuka and Kairi Sane go into the tag team division and compete with Alexa Bliss, Charlotte Flair, the Bellas, potentially the Iconics if you're keeping an eye on spoiler warning news shows, as that tag division gets rebuilt. For the tag match though, the focus was very much Asuka versus Io, was very much Kairi not being comfortable in her role, but in the end it was very cut and dry. There's not much to really say about this match. The tempo was maintained, and I'd also got to argue, after a match as well received and as exciting as John Cena versus AJ Styles, it's a tough spot for the women's tag match. It's a tough spot for anyone. Thankfully, because it's Rhea Ripley, the crowd got back into it. They were able to let the crowd rest for a moment while they just built up to the hot tag and got the crowd going again. I think they pulled a blinder with that particularly. The match itself, probably the weakest of the night, but that's no insult to it. The match was still pretty solid. It just wasn't as spectacular as the matches going on around it. Once I've covered the main event, I will rank the matches, and unfortunately, the women's division does look like it's let itself down when I don't think it did. You're up against a lot. The main event was Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins. I expected this to main event, and I was honestly very happy to see it. I think the match itself was very good, though I have question marks over the pedigree being a transitional move now. And I also feel like the moment when Seth Rollins hit a pedigree, then a curb stomp, and Cody kicked out, is very telling of a long-term strategy here. You see, way back at WrestleMania 28, The Undertaker took a sweet chin music from a referee, Shawn Michaels, into a pedigree from Triple H and still kicked out. Triple H booked that spot. He wanted The Undertaker to look like an absolute machine. He wanted to kind of retire in that match, but in the end he had to come out of retirement to wrestle Sting, to wrestle Roman Reigns, to wrestle Seth Rollins. He was looking to retire in that moment, but much like The Undertaker, he got pulled right back in again. The Undertaker was always going to keep going. Cody Rhodes performed extremely well. I didn't love the watch being the deciding factor. First and foremost, a lot of this match was booked around Roman Reigns. And also one more who I really wish we could move on from. It was kind of booked heavily around The Rock. Talking about WrestleMania when they had the tag team match. Talking about the Rolex, which was given to The Rock as well. It was still much more heavily rock-based than I would like. But again, tempo was good, match was strong. I don't think it quite competes with Cena versus Styles, but it doesn't have the automatic history. I was predicting a Rollins win, and I got one. I'm 5-0 when it comes to this actual PLE. I could argue that it was predictable, but predictability isn't always negative. It really isn't. I was very happy with what we got, and very happy with what WWE delivered. Crown Jewel, I've got to say, in the bag, delivered for me. I really quite enjoyed it. If I'm going to rank the matches, at the top for me is John Cena versus AJ Styles. Right after that, in second place, is Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins. Then it is Roman Reigns versus Bronson Reed. Then it was the tag team match with Rhea Ripley and Io Sky versus Kairi Sane and Asuka. And finally, Stephanie Vaca versus Tiffany Stratton, primarily because I didn't feel it had long enough. Another 5-10 minutes, and I think this would have been competing with Roman Reigns versus Bronson Reed, which I also felt was limited in what they were able to do with it. We've got a few things to talk about when it comes to fan reaction. I always find it interesting going back to the days in Twitter to try and work out what's actually going on over there. And it's interesting seeing some of the love. The Undertaker, for example, gave a lot of praise to the John Cena AJ Styles match, saying a masterclass and beautiful tribute to wrestling. The WWE Universe said it, but that was awesome. Imagine a world 5-10 years ago when The Undertaker is on Twitter talking about how great wrestling is. Yeah. What a world we live in. Few responses from Reddit. Badger Sprite says, fantastic show, great matches up and down the card, especially AJ Cena, who's had a rocket strapped to them, like Stephanie out of nowhere, she's on an absolute heater. But then you've got someone like Soul Game Man on Squared Circle saying 4 out of 10. We'll be remembered for the start and end, but that in between was not too good. Also a lot of wasted potential. I'm going to go over to my own YouTube comments page, the community page I should say, where I asked the question, what do people think of Crown Jewel? Joe Potter says, I think the John Cena match was absolutely amazing. I loved how they did different finishes. So like Cena did the RKO, and I love how John Cena did a tribute for Bray. Nevin Itoma says, much better than WrestlePalooza, win decisions, and especially the Cena-Styles match. And Paul Britt said, a solid 8 out of 10 PLE. Opening match was okay. Steph versus Tiffy needed a little more time, and it's an easy, predictable match for me. Tag match was my least favourite. Seth Cody was a really great match and good storytelling. Those two are, I think, wrestling soulmates, and the right person won. Cena Styles was a love letter to professional wrestling and a great reminder to me why I love wrestling. Right people won for every match. I agree with all of that. We are going to be doing recordings for this podcast on Mondays, and then it will go live as you're watching it right now, either on Monday or you can watch it later in the week. It's why we cover a lot of topics to make it a bit more historically relevant. But if you are interested in getting your comments read out, I will be posting on the community page, asking you guys questions so that I can make sure we still get a little bit of interaction from the people watching. Right. Let's talk a little bit now about John Cena. Not just John Cena versus AJ Styles, but John Cena in general. John Cena's finale tour has been very up and down. We are now, I feel, at the ideal moment. We are now, I feel, exactly where we should always have been with John Cena, which is he's a good guy, wrestling people from his history and sharing a lot of love for them. He's still disappointed he couldn't get to wrestle Joe Hendry, even though not from his history. He's still disappointed he couldn't get to wrestle Baron Corbin. He really had a lot of respect and a lot of time for Baron Corbin. He's also a little bit disappointed he didn't get to wrestle Edge, but unfortunately that's just not something that's going to work out long term. The Brock Lesnar match was enforced, as in it was enforced on him. To go back through this tour, though, I do feel there are a lot of mistakes that have been made. A lot of mistakes that have been made. First and foremost, while I do think it was good to have him announce it in the way that he has, it's the heel turn. It just did not work out. And even though I feel that he did very well, ultimately the impact of The Rock was a huge negative. We started out with Money in the Bank in 2024 when John Cena made an announcement that took about half an hour in an in-ring promo. I remember watching it live with you guys as well. And he did announce that he would be retiring in 2025. He'd have 30 to 40 dates. He wouldn't be there every week, but he'd try and be as involved as possible. We knew he was going to get something going for WrestleMania. I reported before the Royal Rumble that it was John Cena versus Cody Rhodes. That was the plan. That's where they were going. But then he lost at the Royal Rumble. I remember being stunned by this. And I remember being very happy with this. The Jey Uso win was huge for Jey Uso and really did help build a main event star in main event Jey Uso. Someone who, for many months, it's now starting to come down, was one of the key players in WWE. So John Cena had a huge hand in that. It also made things a little less predictable going forward. And what I've got to say, despite not being happy with the heel turn, it did certainly mean that this entire last run has been memorable and unpredictable. We go on to the Elimination Chamber, which was the heel turn. Seth Rollins essentially helping CM Punk to the loss, with John Cena keeping him in question beforehand. Now, it doesn't look like the original plan to have Seth Rollins as the third man with The Rock and John Cena worked out because of The Rock's availability. The Rock wasn't available after the heel turn at all. So he just didn't do anything. And that's the main reason why this heel turn did not work. The Elimination Chamber heel turn itself, in that moment, absolutely fantastic. I remember being so taken in, and those who watched me do it live, you'll have to let me know in the comments, you know that I reacted very strongly to this. It's been coming for so long. Like Veer, he was always coming, and then he came. And when he came, it wasn't worth the wait. Too much edging, not enough finishing. After so many years, is it impossible to actually have a good heel turn for John Cena? I think he committed brilliantly. He did everything he could. It felt a lot like Daniel Bryan and his Fickle. And that worked for me. The promos were great. The promos are fantastic. He stopped destroying people on the mic, which has got to be hard for someone like John Cena to do. He committed and he did well. But then at WrestleMania, we got Travis Scott. And one of the most disappointing main events to a WrestleMania ever. Ever. The second you saw Travis Scott, in fact, to be fair, the entire match was wrestled at such a low tempo that I was just mad. After years of Roman Reigns matches not delivering because they took 50 minutes and he spent most of the time standing around just shaking his hand at the crowd, I thought we were going somewhere different. We finally had a new person. We're in the era of Cody Rhodes main eventing WrestleMania now. And it just didn't go anywhere. The match was dull. The match was boring. Travis Scott didn't seem to know where he was, let alone why he was there. And I just found it very disappointing. There were months afterwards where the entire thing was so heavily undermined. The match of R-Truth was okay. The You Can't Handle the Truth was an okay moment. It was alright against Randy Orton. It was okay against CM Punk. None of these matches are as memorable as the AJ Styles match. And I do think John Cena realises that because of being a heel, he couldn't pop the crowd. But we wanted to celebrate this man. We wanted to give him love. We wanted him to know that after years of John Cena sucks, he'd earned that respect. He'd earned that love. The same way we don't want to boo Roman Reigns anymore. I'm very glad that WWE abandoned it. Even though it was very out of nowhere. And it seemed very silly. It seemed very staged. But it did happen. Just before SummerSlam, John Cena apologised to the fans, swapped his alignment back, and the match with Cody Rhodes at SummerSlam was far superior. Far superior. It was a loss, so Cody Rhodes got his championship back, but I do feel like those few months when Cody Rhodes wasn't the champion will stand him very good in the future. He doesn't need to be champion all the time. Just like Steve Austin didn't need to be champion all the time. Nobody needs to be champion all the time. We've had it with Roman Reigns, and hell, that was great. Because it was so rare. It's elevated Cody. It's given him something to do while he was off doing other things. Now he's back. Now he's a champion. He's picked up another loss. And there'll be more Drew McIntyre in his future, I'm sure. But right now, Drew McIntyre is busy with Jacob Fatu. So maybe not too soon. Cody Rhodes needs some new opponents. And I don't love the idea of it being solo again. That's not for me. Going forward with John Cena, though, this is where it gets weird again. Because they brought back Brock Lesnar. Then they forgot about Brock Lesnar. Then when Brock Lesnar actually did return, John Cena also left. So they didn't really interact at all, apart from, I believe, 2 F5s. And then the match happens, and it's a demolition job. What is the point here? What is the point? You're on the right track now, but you're on the right track with John Cena when there's 4 dates left. The damage is done. It's just too late. It's just too late. Let me know in the comments what you thought of John Cena's run at the top as a heel. And let me know if, for example, for you it did work. Let me know if for you this was a great thing. I want to talk for a moment about the Roman Reigns situation. He's just back from filming Street Fighter. He is expected to be featuring in War Games. He is expected to be in alignment with Jacob Fatu, and it looks like Drew McIntyre will be joining Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed, which I've got to say is a really good pairing. That is a unit, that is a trio I can really get behind, and there's others that are likely to be involved as well. It's possible that Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins actually stand beside each other at War Games. Not what I was expecting. But for the bloodline at the moment, we've seen that he can't fully trust the Usos. This is bloodline pacing. So with Roman Reigns, it takes about a year for anything to happen. And you know what? He's brilliant, so I'm not going to argue with it. Jey Uso is slowly suggesting a heel turn, which makes me think once again it's going to be Jimmy who actually does turn heel. But the War Games situation, I think, is a perfect way to really make that happen. I think we could see a world in which, and it sounds so silly right now with everything happening on Raw, I think we can see a world in which on Roman's side you have Roman, you have Seth, you have Jacob Fatu, you have CM Punk, you possibly have LA Knight. Let's say that 5. On the other side, you have Bron Breakker, Bronson Reed, Drew McIntyre, and the Usos. Seems silly to say right now, I know, but the bloodline is fractured. And if Roman Reigns decides on CM Punk and LA Knight over the Usos, I can see them being taken in by the will of a Bron Breakker. And you know what? I don't hate it as a concept. The Usos as heels hugely reinvigorates the tag division. Particularly on Raw, where Usos versus New Day takes on a very different dynamic. Where Usos versus Viking Raiders can finally happen, where we can get the Motor City Machine Guns across to Monday Night Raw and have something WWE have been wanting for a long time, the Usos versus Motor City Machine Guns. Tell me you don't want that. DIY versus the Usos. Tell me you don't want that. Give me more Usos versus Street Profits. You know what they can do. For Roman, he'll be back soon. He'll be declaring himself for War Games. He'll be declaring that he wants Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed, and anybody who wants to help him will get their moment in the sun. We're heading into Royal Rumble and WrestleMania afterwards, and when I say these things take a year to go, I was looking towards a Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins match at WrestleMania, but that now seems unlikely. With the switch around, with Bron Breakker spearing Seth Rollins, there are suggestions now that the shoulder injury that Seth picked up during Crown Jewel was actually a lot more serious than it seemed at first. Wrestling Observer is suggesting that, for example, that might be the reason behind a quick change around. Now, Bron Breakker left Raw with the World Heavyweight Championship, even though CM Punk left Raw as the number 1 contender. So, what's going to happen here? How's this going to come around? CM Punk might be the World Heavyweight Champion going into WrestleMania. He might be the World Heavyweight Champion going into War Games. allowing us to really get some Punk versus Breakker time in the War Game setting, with Roman Reigns essentially being the guy who made it happen, but not necessarily the main character. For the Royal Rumble, I don't know. Bron Breakker's obviously up there now. Breakker versus Seth has been the plan for a long time, since this was actually made into the vision. Since that first moment after WrestleMania when Bron Breakker was supporting Seth Rollins, it was with a promise that Bron Breakker versus Seth Rollins was the future. So I can't argue past Bron Breakker. I did lean at times towards Sami Zayn. There was a time when Sami Zayn was the guy, but that changed a couple of weeks before his move to SmackDown, as I've reported. So they pulled out of that one. They surprised us last year with Jey Uso, so it's not impossible something completely different happens. So maybe Bronson Reed could win it. Maybe LA Knight could win it. I feel there are almost too many very good options here, which, if you're watching a Royal Rumble, too many very good options is kind of exactly what we're going for. Kind of exactly what we're going for. As regards to the women's division after Crown Jewel, and in fact on Raw as well, where we saw a tag team match with Bayley and Lyra Valkyria versus Roxanne Perez and Raquel Rodriguez. We also saw Rhea Ripley take on Kairi Sane. I've seen fans suggesting that we need a shake-up, and I completely agree. I'd like to see Bayley going over to SmackDown. Bayley versus Tiffany Stratton really works for me. I'd like to see Nia Jax going over to Raw. I think Jade Cargill and Nia Jax have done all they really can at this point. So I think Nia Jax works better on Raw, where she can wrestle the Raquel Rodriguez level. She can wrestle people like Asuka at times. There are new faces for her to take on. But I also feel like we need Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair back and involved a lot more. So I'd like to see them versus the Kabuki Warriors. I'd like to see the women's tag division just a lot more focused on. Because WWE are building new people. Tiffany Stratton feels top level now. Stephanie Vaquer, who only debuted on the main roster 6 months ago, feels top level now. Roxanne Perez is getting heavily involved. Julia is kind of just there. Zelina Vega had a good moment on SmackDown. There are people that they're building very nicely. You look at Lyra Valkyria and her work with Becky Lynch, now her work with Bayley. They're building people very nicely. The problem is, they are repeating themselves a lot. And when you've built someone as big as Stephanie Vaquer to a point where I feel that we're going to see AJ Lee win the Intercontinental Championship from Becky, and then Becky versus Stephanie Vaquer at WrestleMania, when you're building things like that, you do need more than just the people. You need things that are fresh. You need things that are exciting, and you need to give them more than one matchup at a PLE. So the women's division came out of this looking very good. The women themselves came out of this looking very good. And even though I don't think it has anything to do with the mid-card championships, they've got a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff. Bianca Belair still hasn't even returned. So let's see where we go from there. Crown Jewel took place in Perth, Australia. Australia's been the host to SmackDown and Raw as well. I got to give the crowd some credit here, not just for the Bray Wyatt element, but for the songs that they sung, the people that they cheered for. I was very excited about how well they did in Perth. PLEs outside of the US are working really well right now for the WWE. If anything, I feel like US crowds are kind of being shamed into being a lot more active now. A lot more active. And they're having to be. That element of shame is not going to go away. The crowds in Paris way back when, Leon actually I think it was, really embarrassed the American crowds, the crowds in the UK. And while the UK under a Labour government can no longer seemingly afford to have WWE or AEW PLEs regularly on show, there are plenty of countries who are going to take the massive economic and financial benefits that the WWE are going to offer them. It also means I can potentially watch Crown Jewel at my leisure. I was originally going to watch it live when I thought it was at 11 a.m. over here, but then it ended up being at 1 p.m. over here, and I have other things that I need to do. A few things I want to talk about behind the scenes then, and particularly some news. We are seeing a world now in which Triple H is becoming a lot more predictable with his programming. John Cena doesn't have too long left. There are still talks about Gunther being his final opponent as Gunther builds up to a potential match against Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. We are also looking at a relatively soon return for Liv Morgan. I don't think she can necessarily make War Games, but she is doing particularly well. Bianca Belair is also recovering fairly well as well. When it comes to the John Cena versus AJ Styles match, there was a standing ovation backstage from production staff, and a lot of compliments were given by fellow wrestlers. The Miz was apparently extremely flattered to be involved in the way that he was. The Miz was on John Cena's list of people to wrestle, but his spot did not go to him in the end. And that's going to be our show. If this format works for you guys, let me know. Also, we've got the Discord link in the description if you want to check that out. But I'm going to wrap up. We will be live again on Friday, so be sure to tune in for that. And then we'll have another podcast like this on Monday. In the meantime, I've been Tom Colohue. You've been fantastic, and I'll see you all very soon.